Welcome to the road to growth, success of an entrepreneur.
We've raised the bar.
Learn firsthand from successful business owners and create your own path to success.
I'm going to show you how great I am.
It's time to hit the road to growth with team lead of the Enriquez Group, Realtor Vinny.
All you Road to Growth listeners, today I got Carol Sanford. She is, I say it a lot. She is a woman of many hats, a business educator, summit producer, podcaster, author. Yet all these titles, all these accolades, go down to the idea of passing on information, passing on knowledge. I think that's the core of who she is. Thank you, Carol, for being here today.
I'm so delighted to be here. And I used to be in real estate too. I didn't tell you about that.
Well, there we go. We're going to add more to that list.
Yeah.
Well, being that you do such a wide variety of things, when you meet someone new and you meet someone in the elevator, right? And they go, "Hey, Carol, what do you do?" Mm-hmm. How do you describe yourself?
It's disrupting certainty.
It's what?
Disrupting certainty.
Okay.
Because we get really stuck in how we think things work. And then when we run into difficulties, we can't get out of it. So all my writings, my podcasts, all are lifting up that which we're certain of and learning a way to question it, learning a way to not get stuck. Because when things like COVID hit you, you don't know what to do. So that's usually the conversation I start with.
Yeah, it's dealing with kind of adversity, dealing with uncertainty. Was that mindset of kind of just dealing with whatever situation you're in something that you kind of grew up with at a young age?
Well, I mentioned to you earlier that I had a father whose way of punishing me was put me in closet, lock the door for hours at a time. And it was hard for me as a kid, but it's weird. It made me so incredibly strong because I would sit there and think about, why is this happening? Why do I see the world differently? And this was like when I was 5 or 6 years old. That learning to be able to manage my own thinking and my upset was mattered. But of course, I had a grandfather on the other side, my maternal grandfather, who was part Mohawk. And he grew up in an indigenous culture. So he was always taking me into not extraordinarily difficult situations, but we go to market. He was a farmer and he would turn me over to try and sell something when I was 6 years old, or make something and take it to market and deal with people who were trying to sell us stuff. He acted like when I was 6, I'd be able to figure it out. And so, I wasn't very good early, but I got pretty good because you know what my father did, which was key, and it's great for every business owner. He afterward have asked me, what did you learn about that? And what would you do differently next time? And what do you wish you'd ask them? And he was constantly stirring me up. So I grew up that way with my grandfather, and then on through life, I had some other great teachers.
Well, let's talk about, first off, your father. So why would he lock you up in the closet?
He was a very racist man. He had a lot of power, a judge. And I played with all the kids around who were mostly Mexican immigrants or people who had managed to make their way here. And I couldn't understand why it was that he had thoughts that they weren't worth me knowing or being around, and that I was so friendly. And I never did quite get it. And so he was trying to break my will. That was what he was trying to do, and get me to agree with him. And that's part of why I'm such a contrarian now, I think, although I was in trouble all the time because I was, even as a young kid. So he was kind of a broken man at one level. He was a great business owner, also owned a truck lines and a lot of farmland, but I didn't talk the way he wanted. I didn't behave the way he wanted. And, he believed he could break my will. Never happened.
You're 5 years old, locked in a closet.
Yeah.
For doing something you felt was normal, just being a good person. what were you thinking about? What was, I mean, do you remember what was going through your head?
Yes, I remember very much. You don't get in that kind of environment and not have it have a strong emotional impact. I don't know that I ever thought about me as a good person. The question I started asking then and still do is, why do we see the world so differently? Why did my father see one thing and I saw another? And then because I had a grandfather who saw it differently, I spent a lot of time in that closet. And now with clients and students I work with, asking them, how did you come to that worldview? How did you get so that looked true and right to you? Have you ever questioned it? And I wasn't very sophisticated at it as a very young child, but I got better and better. And then my mother decided we probably ought to leave for my safety. And so I would then have my father out of my life, but I had mentors who showed up who were always asking that kind of question. How did you get, just like you said, what went on in that closet? What did you learn? If you have people, and you should find people like that if you don't, they really want to know you wherever you are and want to know why you're thinking the way you are. Because otherwise you can't see your own thinking unless it becomes explicit.
You're learning to ask why. You're learning to say, okay, I mean, why is this? Why is that? What was the response you were getting? I mean, because I mean, you probably see a lot of younger kids, a lot of younger adults that ask that question, and sometimes people get fed up with it. They don't want to respond to it. I mean, what was your feedback from asking the question why to adults as you were aging?
Well, I did it differently than that. I didn't go just to ask them a question. I said, and I got to go to UC Berkeley in a very interesting time. And there was a man there named Thomas Kuhn who wrote a book called The Structure of the Scientific Revolution, which was about paradigms. Now, we all know that word now, but it wasn't known then. And so I began to construct because I asked Kuhn, how would you know who was in what paradigm? And how would I know what I was in? And he said, well, I wrote the book on the subject. You get to figure that out. He didn't mean me only, everybody in the class. And so I created a way to look at and see where we are. And I would share with people instead of saying, what are you thinking and why? I would say, here's how I think about it. What do you think of that? And it drew them in. And so I quickly became an educator. I was never a consultant, but my ideas were always contrarian, but my behavior was more inviting. And so at a very well, as almost as soon as I graduated from college, I went into getting a master's and then worked on a doctorate. And all of it was about learning to be Socratic, learning to find frameworks to think through, that you could ask people questions and let them discover what they thought. So that wasn't so. I mean, I learned not to do the push back on people from pushing back on my father. Instead, got good at seeing myself and asking other people what they thought about it.
What was your intentions of asking why? I mean, some people ask the question why to grow their knowledge base. Other people ask the question why
Yeah,
to help people self-realize and grow.
yeah. My questions were always about them thinking better, not because I told them how to think, but to evolve their own mind ability to answer their own questions. I don't ask questions out of curiosity of people because I think what you get is kind of automatic answers. Then, why do you do this? Where do you go? Tell me your life story. No, I don't try and find out about people. I try and find out a way that I could help them question themselves and do this thing I called earlier disrupt certainty. So by the time I leave, my desire is they're going, wow, I want to think about that some more. I never had that thought. I hadn't looked at it that way. I hadn't had a framework like that. I hadn't had that kind of question. So they walk away not thinking about anything they learned from me particularly, but something they learned from themselves, maybe by the process I used or the framework I put in front of them. And that's still my life's work. I got 6 books, And that's what they look like. They educate people and say, here's an exercise that I make workbooks in the books. Here's an exercise. Go do this and see what you think using my ideas, but you don't have to adopt them. They're not for sale, they're for examination.
Well, so I guess it gets to the idea that you're asking the questions why, you're growing in this kind of mindset to help other people grow. What were you getting? What were you receiving out of helping other people grow?
So I love to answer that question. I want to tell you, I didn't use the word why very often. I more use what. What is going on here? What are you seeing? And there is an extraordinary fulfillment for your life if what you do is see people seeing something they couldn't see before, especially in themselves. Say, one of my books is called No More Feedback, and number 7 I'm writing right now is called No More Gold Stars, which means none of this work is about me affirming you or giving you feedback. It's giving you the capacity to be self-managing. So in the book 5, I think it is, or the regenerative life. I know, by the way, CEOs I've worked with and executives and business owners write the forwards to all my books, 2 of them, one in business and one in academia. And they all say in some way or the other, working with this material, the way Carol does it, changed my life and it changed my business. That's what I take away. A sense that they have really changed. I'd say to them, I didn't change anything for you. I gave you a way to work on change for yourself. So for people to become resilient and dynamic rather than static and selling their story and telling it, if when you're 20 you start a business or 25 and 10 years later you're still telling the same story, you're not growing. And that's what your audience, what your work is about, right? Grow. And so I say what I want to do is go beyond growth into development. So what thrills me and what I get back is watching people become something more they didn't know they could be, creating some bigger contribution. Now, my clients turn out to make about 35% to 65% growth per year for the first 5 years when they switch to a more Socratic discovery way of working rather than a drive, sell. When they do that, that's gratifying. I'm really glad because they can keep doing something with their business. What really matters is when Jeffrey Holler, founder of Seventh Generation, which is non-toxic paper products, household products, personal care, when he says, it changed my life and it changed how I run my business, I'll take that any day. And by the way, every executive, every owner I've ever worked with, I'm still connected to. That said something, right? And not all of them are paying me. Jeffrey and I are writing articles together now to try and stir up people's thinking. Many of them are members of the communities I have, so they get to keep growing and learning. A few who are retired, but they still show up. So that's a lot of fulfillment. And that's why I do my work.
Was there ever a time where, because I've had a variety of different coaches. Most of the coaches I've had on the podcast or mentors I've had on the podcast, they've they usually have that giving mindset, and they've started their own business, and then they get into coaching, starting that kind of business and helping other people grow. Was there ever the idea, the mindset of building something outside of the coaching brand, some sort of business? Or
I've never been a coach. I don't believe in coaching.
okay.
That says, I know more than you. I'm going to teach you what I know. Now run with it.
Hmm.
What I do is build your capability to think. I ran 2 small businesses straight out of college. One of them I hinted at. I owned a bunch of real estate. It's just north of Portland, Oregon. And it was a very slow time for trying to have rentals, commercial or whatever during that little window of time. And so I had to invent very creative ways to rent apartments that I had. And I had this idea, which was, why not rent to people no one else would rent to, but they all have cosigners? I thought, how in the world could you do that? Well, it occurred to me, immigrants who come into this country have no social security, no driver's license, but they come in through churches often. So I went to a couple of churches, and I ended up renting to a lot of Ukrainians and Russians and folks who were coming in. The members of the church co-signed. Those people were so grateful. They took such good care. And I had every apartment filled, every commercial building filled. Uh, and so I knew a lot about what it took to think creatively in my own business. I also ran a pattern design business, which we computerized and sold to Vogue Pattern. I'm talking about clothing that were copying designer originals, and I could go buy the fabric at a discount, sell it to people who wanted to make a pattern, and sell them the pattern. And I sold that business. So, and I sold the real estate business. And after that, I thought, okay, I don't want to run day to day hands on. I really like, and that's when I went to graduate school and became uh, assistant professor for a little while.
Well, I think we skimmed over a lot of things then, right? If if you're in college and you have two businesses and real estate, I mean, from we jump from getting locked in closets
Yeah.
to having multiple properties in college. I mean, can you give us an idea of where did the empowerment come from? I mean, especially a young woman, probably back then, it was
Yeah.
probably not the norm to have
No,
multiple of
no.
properties.
So I did all that real estate right after I graduated, not while I was still in college. And I was married. And um, the marriage didn't work really well. I had not had a good male model to learn to work with, but he was a smart person, and he was very good at helping me manage the land kinds of stuff, things getting fixed and so forth that needed to be fixed. And he also took the pattern company and computerized it. He was part of Hewlett Packard and a bunch of other things. So I didn't do it all by myself, but all of the business ideas were mine, and the funding I raised was mine. And what happened between those two is that I was at UC Berkeley, and UC Berkeley is, I don't think it is so much anymore, but when I was there, it was filled with people who were changing the world. And I was sitting philosophy classes like with Thomas Kuhn, but like with Edward Teller, who created the hydrogen bomb, and with philosophers, Hannah Arendt, who was looking at how we ended up with authoritarian dictators. I had so much 360-degree challenging me, and those faculty members were extraordinarily supportive. I had not been a very good high school student, but it turned out it was not because I wasn't smart. It was because they were trying to cram knowledge into me instead of teaching me to think. When I got to undergraduate school, uh, I had profound people around me, and I soaked it up. And I, in that process, every day realized, and I would have a professor saying to me, "You have already overcome so much. Your life has been not easy, and you are already here. So where do you want to go next?" They were always saying, "Where do you want to go next?" So I think I soaked up really important people, but people who wanted me to make a difference with my life.
Where do you, I mean, where do you think the personability came from? Especially when you talked about you didn't have a great male role model,
Right.
um, and your first husband probably wasn't the best in that sense. It
No.
does sound like your grandfather was kind of a resource.
Yeah.
Yet, where did that personability come from of actually taking in knowledge from other people and actually allowing yourself to soak it in?
That's a really good question. I mean, if I look at a couple of other patterns along the way, I think that I was hungry
Mm,
for something more. I didn't mention I had a mother who was mentally ill. And so I ended up having to take care of them. I started working very, very young. Part of why my grandfather helped me was I could go to the market and I could sell things and I could take home money to my mother. So I think I felt a lot of responsibility.
mm,
But I was also a very I love to read. I love to listen to adults talk about things I didn't understand. Uh, and I know that I talk with people about everyone has an essence, and that essence is not your personality. It's not what you can do, it's who you are. And I believe that from some very young age, including I almost didn't survive my own birth and neither my mother, but we did, there was something determined about me. And I don't necessarily believe in past lives, but some people tell me I must have overcome something before I got here this round. I don't know. Uh, but I know that from a very, very young age, I wanted to understand things that I couldn't understand. And I love finding things I couldn't understand and then go try and talk to people and read about them, like, why in the world was my father racist? Where did that come from? And that was one of my earliest questions, and I kept finding other things. And now if you go to anything I run, you'll find me putting out another question people don't know the answer to, uh, and teaching people how to work on it, not giving them my answer. So I think it was a combination. If I hadn't been engaging with other people and listening, I couldn't have created arenas for helping people develop their own thinking. I'm not sure I'm answering your question very well, but it's going to make me go think about it some more.
no, no, it's good. I mean, you have so many hats. You talked about 7 books. I mean, you do the podcast. You're constantly providing information. Where's the big why? What's that why that's still driving you? I know you said that you get a jolt from helping other people. Is
Yeah.
that simply what it is? Just that that daily, weekly, monthly jolt?
So, first, let me tell you, I don't provide knowledge. I think knowledge is dangerous.
Uh,
I provide processes to gain understanding.
okay.
So, knowledge I can absorb, I can remember, I can take a test on it. If you read any of my books, they will not give you my answers. They will give you my process for getting to answers. Um, I've read a lot about what a life might be like. I watched my mother and my sister, both of whom had terrible problems. And I always thought, I'm sorry that they haven't been able to do as much with their life. And my father also. But I watched my grandfather, who had lived for a bit of his life in eastern Oklahoma on a Native American reservation. And yet he was amazing at what he did to support people and to help them grow. Uh, and he had almost no money. And I know there was a part of me at a very young age that wanted to be more like my grandfather because I could see joy is not the right word, but I use fulfillment a lot because he used that. Um, and I think I almost every decade of my life created a bigger promise I thought I should be able to fulfill, and that I had to learn to do that. And I internalized it, or let's say I institutionalized that with all my clients. I developed programs on how to grow a company, and I've spent several years each time teaching a company how to grow itself these 35 to 65%. And most of it was about developing the capability of people in the organization to think like a CEO, but be themselves. And I think the biggest probably change I introduced was this idea of having every person make a promise beyond ableness, which meant they could see something that needed doing. I could see the need to overcome racism. And I ended up working in South Africa for 3 years during the transition of Mandela off Robben Island into being president. And that process, we institutionalized the idea of promise beyond ableness with Black Africans being able to move to the top of the company in 6 months, lay off no white Africans, reduce it to zero violence, which was the only company, it was Colgate Palmolive, the only company who had no violence internally. So now I have begun to fulfill that first promise. But where my father was able to create great destruction, I felt like I had made a promise to make up for as much of that as I could and not let anyone else end up in that situation. So then I made promises about working in Europe with Colgate and I wasn't an employee for them. I was a contractor, right, who was developing. Then I started looking at what I should learn to write. I wrote my first book. By the way, I don't. You probably can't tell how old I am, but you can hear all these stories at a long rate. I am 80 years old.
Wow.
Right. And every decade, I have made a commitment to something else. And when I was 60, I made a commitment to start writing. I published my first book when I was 65. And now I will have 7 books, not this year. My most recent one was just out a month ago. And by the way, if you'll let me brag, it is a #1 bestseller on Amazon in 4 categories. It's a big deal to be a bestseller in the 100. I was #1. That was one of my determinations, and not because my ego needed it. I'm kind of past that, but my platform needed it so I could get the word further out. So that was another promise beyond able to reach more people to believe in themselves. My newest book that'll come out in 2023 is getting people to quit trusting always somebody else's opinion of them and their business knowing itself and coming back to trusting your own lived experience, because I think that's undermining democracy. So my work this coming decade, we'll see how long I live, I could drop dead tomorrow, is to do the work it takes to make democracy work again, because people don't go ask somebody else how to vote or create groups that go against other groups, but do the work it takes to have people trust their own lived experience. My goodness, I went on a long time.
How are you going to make democracy work again besides the book?
Well, all of my books are just doors to
Yeah.
get people. I run communities which people become members of. Some people have been in them for 40 years. And it's an education discovery, not an activism community, but for example, one of the things that we did in South Africa that we were working on democracy there is we built inside the business the opportunity and the ableness for every member, whether they were a detergent tower operator or an R&D person, to produce one of these promises beyond ableness. When they went out in the community and were doing work, they no longer were trying to sell things. They were looking at how to build communities and overcome any of the things that tear them down. We also erase any conversation about race, because I introduced the idea and got tons of scientists who came and confirmed it. There's no such thing as race. We are all one human race. And if we design work, which we didn't there, we got rid of all work systems that were competitive. So you didn't have a hierarchy where people get promoted because you can then take race into account. If you redesign all the work system so that everyone can produce something they want to promise and they have their own path to climb on, not in competition, not having to be sorted, and pay and progression can be individual. And I know this doesn't make sense to people. I'm sorry, because it takes quite a while to learn to see how you redesign work. I have one book that gives hints, the regenerative business, but you have to get rid of all the things that assume race should be taken into account. because all of that is because we've designed work that cause people to compete and undermine and be able to have to form cliques to survive and have to evaluate others so they can have their own preferences. So, what I do is redesign work systems because when you redesign it at work, it tends to go home with you. And it changes how your family works and it goes out into your volunteer roles. So, in most of the places I've worked, when we redesign work systems, it permeates the community. And, I'm talking about decades and decades for all this would play out. And it's not a straight line, it goes backwards. The guy who took over in South Africa undid a lot of what we did in the business, but he couldn't undo it in the townships. He couldn't undo it in people's heart and the way they work. So it's kind of like the drip, drip, drip method. I build another business with someone and I have hundreds of people who are in my communities who are out planning to do this. So we're working on undermining the current work design and giving people something that's good for business, good for planet, good for society, and good for democracy. Could you see any of that, or does it just sound strange?
It's a lot. It's a lot of information to soak in, and I think people listening might have to rewind or
Yeah,
go back a little bit to soak it all in. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. No, there's a lot of nuggets, and I think it also too the pieces are going to come together for people listening really as they have a chance to read your books.
yeah,
Um, and I mean, on that topic, if people are listening, they want to get your books
yeah.
and hear more information about what you have to offer. What's the best platform?
Um, well, to start with, you probably should go to carolsanford.com because I have a book page that talks about my current 6 books. And number 7 is I'm writing every day. So, and it will tell you what the subject is, what the book is. I mean, the philosophy is the same, but one is focused on how you build stakeholder relationships. One is about entrepreneurship. By the way, my books are filled with case stories. I tell the ideas through stories. One is built on the kind of thing I was just talking about, work design. One is called the regenerative life, which is about how individuals can change how they live. And I tell a lot of the stories of my grandfather and how I raised my children differently as a result of it than I was raised. And then one of the books is No More Feedback, and it's part of a series that talks about how behaviorism has undermined everything in America for the last 100 years and beyond into Europe. And we've all think we're now rats in a maze and we have to incentivize and punish. And it's built into our work system. So I wrote a book called No More Feedback and did all the research on where it came from, how bad it is, why it undermines everything we would hope for. And then the most recent one, Indirect Work, is about the underlying philosophy of how we have to stop thinking of everything as having to come from outside to make it work. And that is like how we hire people that will come from outside, rewards, recognition, performance reviews, supervision, that all of that has to become indirect work. And how it is we work on developing people so it comes from inside of them. And it's a very short book, 150 pages, but as I said, it's roaring on Amazon. So your platform question is, you have to do what your own life, where how it works. I do sell a lot on Amazon, but I have people buy 800,000, 5,000 books at a time. And I have a way that I can help people if they want to create book clubs and have workbooks and all the stuff that can go with it, all of which is on that one page. Well, it's on the page called Indirect Work. So it doesn't matter where you buy. If you want to buy a whole lot, then send me an email and we'll connect you with my great team.
Well, again, Carol, thank you for being on the Road to Growth podcast. I mean, I'll finish off with this last question. Is there anything, I mean, and I know you've accumulated so much knowledge over the years and you have goals that you're kind of pushing for and is still kind of looking to grow. And is there anything, any advice you would give to your younger self that was in college, that was still trying to find their path? Any kind of advice you'd give to your younger self?
I've always thought it was a strange question because uh, I wouldn't have had the capability to use anything. I would be telling people right now, right? Uh, but I I think if you're talking about when you start in a business, the thing that is most important wherever we can, as soon as we can in life, is to get in touch with our essence, this heart of ourselves, which is distinctive, and listen to it like a siren call. Don't take tests on what's popular or what you could make more money at or try and get in some place where you'd have position rank. All that matters and the way your life will work best is if something is coming deep from you and that it has meaning and has significance. So I think if I had anything I would hope for everyone, that would be it.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, there's probably so many different words, so many things you can call it. You can say essence, you can say, I mean, goals. I mean, I
They're
think for a
not
lot
the
of
same thing.
people,
Nope,
it
they're
it
not the same thing.
well, essence, I would say, is probably your big why. I mean, that's going to be what's going to drive
Nope,
you. What's going to be that?
nope.
Huh?
It is who
Okay.
you are. It has nothing to do with what you do or your personality. It is
Yeah.
something you were born to be.
Okay. Well, yeah, I think for anyone listening right there, I mean, you have a path, and I guess this is where maybe me and Carol probably differ a little bit. I
Yeah.
think we can grow over time, and the person you are is not the person you were. Um, and you're gonna find over time what that why is for you. In my feedback, for Carol, I mean, it's the idea that you are that person and find out who you are deep down. So for each person, find your path, find the way you can grow, find the way you can expand, whatever's pushing you forward. Be it's Carol's method or my method. Either way, you're gonna get farther along once you figure that out. So thank you guys. Please share, please subscribe, go in the show notes and find Carol. Thanks
Thank
everyone.
you, Benny. I think we're closer than you think. Thank you.
Of course.